Everyone. Today's going to be a improv off the cuff rant, if you will, but really truly it's sincerely here's my gift and how I can help people. And this one might surprise you, but I'm going to talk about something a little bit controversial, and that is training. Now, I'm going to put a link below, but here's the thing. Way back when, a few years ago, when I was in high school, I worked with a very enthusiastic franchisee, McDonald's franchisee, and every day he'd come into work, the man was just smiling and singing and whistling, and he was always happy. And he'd tell me every time he saw me, Jeff, you're so lucky. You're getting a world-class business education. I'm going to be honest at the time. Sorry, Barry. I thought he was a little bit crazy. First of all, he was so happy to come to work, and that just didn't seem like a normal thing. But I also, usually I was flipping burgers, I was covered in grease. I burnt myself a lot. I always had scars and burns on my hands, and I could not see. I was very literal. I was like, I'm flipping burgers. There is no education going on here other than I'm flipping burgers. But what I realized as life went on, and this is the meat of the rant, pardon the pun, we don't as adults value training enough. And I just want to point out a couple of things. So, McDonald's, think what you will of them, think what you will of the food. They have a world-class training system. And the reason they have that world-class training system is they recognize that the importance of teaching the employees over and over globally, despite culture, despite age, despite anything, the employees all have the same training. And I'm sure it's changed a little bit in the few years since I worked there in high school, or the many years since I worked there in high school. But I want to point out the power of their training, and I want you to ponder, if you take nothing else away, they have a training system in place so robust, so consistent. They can take high school students, they can take pretty much anybody and train them to do the task over and over and repeat it, so that no matter who is there, no matter who is working, they're all producing similar results. Now, yes, there are some people who don't follow the training as well as others, but the heart of it is the training is the important piece. And I would argue for entrepreneurs, training is critical. And we're going to talk about training in the context of systems and processes tomorrow or the day after in this podcast. But this week is going to be a focus on the basics. And so I just want to point out, I'm going to share my recollections of how we trained and ironically how I still use it. I also want to point out that the other two organizations that I look to for guidance and advice is the US military and Disney. Now, two very different industries, two very different outcomes, but both are very, very consistent in their training. And you might not think of it this way, but the US military is one of the world's leading training organizations. And if you think about it, they're training people to act contrary to their self-interest. They're training people to act in stressful situations without thinking. And again, every member of the US military, they know with certainty what the person to their left or right will do in a certain situation because it's been trained consistently into them. And as for Disney, they train their people. And I think this is the single biggest problem with most organizations, especially, if we look at professional organizations, if we look at small mom and pop restaurants, the problem is we don't have the training. So here's my little rant on training. I hope it gives you some ideas. I will put down in the notes below. There's a link if anybody wants to see my step-by-step process on training. I have a free course I'm offering. So here's the thing, and you will figure out what works for you. But the problem is most people train the same way. Either they don't train at all, which is terrible. It's a really bad idea. You're leaving it to chance, or you're doing it haphazardly as you go. So I'm going to explain how they took an employee at McDonald's back in the day. And yes, I'm going to talk about VHS tapes. So that'll give you an idea that Jeff's not in his 20s. But basically, I'm going to walk you through what we did, why it worked, and then I'm going to give you ideas for your business. And this will be a quick one. I have a more detailed training. If anybody wants it, there's a link below. But basically, what we would do is the very first thing, a new employee would be brought in. They'd be given a quick little tour of the store. So you'd understand the different zones and, what was up front, what the counter looked like, what the kitchen looked like, and what the way back looked like. So that was the first thing. We got the context of what we needed to know and where we'd be performing our job. Then the trainer would take, and there was always a dedicated trainer, and this is important. The trainer would take the new trainee to the specific station, and this is important. They taught them one thing. Once they mastered that one thing, then they teach them the next thing. So they always had the same order, depending on whether you were front end or back end. You always started in one area. And then what they would do is they have a checklist and they'd say, here's the 10 things you need to master in order to be proficient at this task. So they laid out, here's what we expect, here's our expectations, here's what success looks like. And then once they walked through and sort of explained it in context, then they would take the employee back to a break room, and they would walk them through a video. They'd let them watch the video, and the video would be a repeat of the tour, but obviously with a professional trainer. And that's how they married the training and tied it into somebody's memory. They saw it in action at the actual location, and then they saw somebody doing it on a video. And what that did is it gave the person 2 times to observe. And then after the video, the trainer would come back, usually 15, 20-minute video. The trainer would come back, they'd walk you through the checklist and ask you if you understood the steps. They go step by step, make sure you knew what to do. And then they'd go out to the actual station. And this time the trainer would observe the trainee, and they would go through the checklist and say, okay, did you follow the checklist? And they could ask questions. It was always a back and forth dialogue. But at the end of the shift, then they'd sit down and go, okay, on your first shift, you got 8 out of 10. So you got a score of 80%. And then the second shift, you'd have the person come back, the trainee, and you'd have the trainer observe them, and they do the checklist with them just before they started, and then give them their assessment after. And basically, by the end of the third shift, somebody would be doing that one specific task. I started out on burgers, but some people started out on fries. Some people would start out in drive-through. The person after 3 shifts would have the confidence. The 4th shift, they could come back and do that station by themselves. So once the person consistently demonstrated expertise and mastery of that one skill, then a second and a third and a 4th skill was added. So that's the thing. I feel like a lot of today, we just say, okay, here's 50 things, go master all of them. I don't know, we're time pressed, or we think that's the way to go, but the reality is nobody learns like that, and nobody feels competent or satisfied. And that's the key to engaging your people, is they need to know what's expected of them. They need to know what success looks like, and they need to know what the next step is after they master this. So that's my little rant on training, on employees. But the reality is, I don't care if you're a restaurant, I don't care if you run a legal firm, an accounting firm, anything you do. People learn best when you give them the big picture context, then you give them the details in context, and then you show them what to do, you let them do it, and then you let them debrief with you to make sure they did it. And by the way, if something seems big and complex, keep breaking it down until you find that people are succeeding. And the magic of this, again, I'll stress, McDonald's uses it, other fast food restaurants use it to teach teenagers how to run multi-million-dollar restaurants. So keep that in mind. I hope that serves you, and happy training. Next session, we'll talk about processes. Thank you.